Welcome. In today's video, we'll dive into one of the most mysterious and discussed stories in the Bible, the Tower of Babel. This story is loaded with symbolism and goes far beyond simply building a tower. It speaks to us about human nature, pride, and, according to some, even humanity's destiny. Throughout this video, we'll explore the dark secrets of the Tower of Babel, from its origins in ancient Babylon to interpretations that connect it with the Antichrist, a prophetic figure mentioned in the New Testament. This story has been the subject of study, reflection, and even conspiracy theories, so get ready for a deep and revealing analysis. Imagine the scene. After the flood, humanity was restarting life, united by a single language and purpose. But as we'll see, this union was filled with intentions that directly challenged God's will. The Tower of Babel teaches lessons that still resonate today and that, according to some interpretations, continue to be reflected in human behavior. Stay until the end to discover how this story is connected to themes of power, prophecies, and the fate of nations. The story of the Tower of Babel begins in Genesis, chapter 11, right after the great flood that devastated the earth. At this point, humanity had a fresh opportunity to start over, and Noah's descendants were quickly multiplying, repopulating the planet. The Bible tells us that everyone shared a common language, which gave them full communication ability and thus enabled effective organization for significant achievements. This linguistic unity was a divine gift that facilitated harmony and cooperation among people. It was a time of growth and expansion, where people settled in various regions. However, instead of spreading across the world as God had commanded, they decided to center their lives in one place, the plain of Shinar, where the construction of Babel would begin. This post-flood setting is fascinating because it reveals the power and potential humanity had when acting in unity. Genesis 11 verses 1 to 4 records. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. And they said to each other, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." This decision to make a name for ourselves suggests an intention of self-promotion and power assertion, as if they wanted to establish themselves as a civilization that no longer needed to follow God's directions. Their gathering in one place also shows resistance to the divine order to populate the entire earth, revealing clear disobedience. Building this tower was far more than just a desire for architectural greatness. It held a deep and symbolic meaning. Their desire to reach the heavens indicated a quest for autonomy and independence. They wanted to build a monument that represented their unity and strength. But this unity was dangerous because it was based on pride and an attempt to replace God, reaching the divine without relying on him. The Tower of Babel thus became seen as a symbol of rebellion and humanity's desire to become self-sufficient. It represents human vanity and glory, aspects repeatedly criticized in Scripture for distancing people from their spiritual essence and dependence on God. As the tower rose, God closely watched the project's progress. Genesis 11 verses 5 to 6 says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, 'If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them.' The Lord realized that if this unrestrained ambition continued to grow, they would increasingly stray from his guidance. This pride-based unity would become a force that could completely divert humanity from God's paths. So he decided to intervene and what happened next changed the course of humanity. The tower itself has deep significance, both spiritually and historically. For many scholars, the tower symbolizes human pride and the constant attempt to reach heaven, to conquer the impossible, and to achieve almost divine power. In Genesis 11 verse 4, the intention to make a name for ourselves is a clear expression of this pride and self-sufficiency. They were saying they could live without depending on God, that they could build their own glory. This desire for independence is a recurring theme in the Bible and appears in several other stories, such as the fall of Lucifer and the Garden of Eden. Each of these stories speaks of the temptation to disobey God and seek personal glory. When the people of Babel decided to build the tower, they chose a powerful symbol of their ambition and selfishness. The tower represents not only human effort, but also the search for an autonomous identity, an attempt to create a legacy without God. This desire to reach the heavens, to be at the top, recalls Lucifer's pride, who also desired to occupy a place that wasn't his. And just as Lucifer fell, so would Babel. The Bible shows that this attitude of not needing God leads to ruin because humanity was not created to exist without the Creator. Additionally, historically, the region of Shinar where Babel was built is Mesopotamia, a rich and prosperous area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. At that time, it was the center of the earliest civilizations, and the inhabitants of this region already possessed advanced architectural knowledge. We can imagine that the Tower of Babel was a grand and imposing structure made with bricks and bitumen, common construction materials at the time. This construction could have inspired other towers and temples in Mesopotamia, such as the famous Babylonian ziggurats, which were pyramid-shaped temples where various gods were worshipped. It's important to remember that the tower represented not only human pride, but also a symbol of unity and power. The problem was that this unity was founded on self-sufficiency, not on dependence on God. Babel's construction represented a unity of intentions and actions that defied the divine order to spread across the earth. It was as if humanity was saying they preferred their security and stability over trusting God's plans. This choice reveals the tension between divine will and human freedom, a tension still present today in many areas of our lives. God saw that this construction would bring future problems and that the pride of those people could lead to a complete disconnection from Him. To prevent this pride from growing further, He intervened by confusing their language and scattering them across the earth. This act was both a corrective measure and a lesson on the limits of human ambition and the importance of relying on God. Seeing the construction's progress and the rise of human pride, God decides it's time to intervene. In Genesis 11 verses 7 to 9, we find the passage describing this divine intervention. "Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. This is one of the few moments in the Bible where we see God acting so directly to interrupt a human action. God's descent is seen as a sign of His proximity and attention, as He closely follows humanity's attitudes and intentions. Many scholars interpret this intervention as an act of mercy and correction. By confusing their language, God prevented humanity from advancing down a path of pride and self-destruction. By confusing the languages, God not only stopped the tower's construction, but also created a division that forced people to disperse over the earth. This scattering was a corrective measure to ensure that the original order, given to Noah and his descendants after the flood, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth," would be fulfilled. From this point forward, people could no longer communicate easily and, as a result, formed new groups, each with its own language and culture. This fragmentation of languages marks the beginning of the cultural and linguistic diversity we know today. Each group of people followed its own path, creating different civilizations and contributing to the world's diversity. This divine intervention, therefore, was not just an act of discipline, but also an essential step for the development of a humanity rich in varied cultures and traditions. The confusion of languages in Babel carries profound symbolism. For scholars, this division represents the plurality and diversity that would characterize humanity from then on, but also a separation among peoples. Babel becomes a symbol of what can happen when human pride tries to supplant divine guidance. The name Babel is associated with babbling or confusion, indicating that God undid the unity of the peoples based on pride and rebellion. This divine intervention can be seen as a response to the spirit of self-sufficiency of the peoples. God was, in essence, reminding humanity of its place in the universe, that he is the creator, and that man, in challenging his authority, is doomed to fail. The Tower of Babel becomes a landmark in biblical history, a symbol of the consequences of trying to achieve glory without God. Moreover, the dispersal of people worldwide brought challenges, but also allowed different cultures and civilizations to develop independently, each with its own languages, traditions, and beliefs. This event marks the origin of nations and languages, creating a much more complex and dynamic world. However, this diversity also brought conflicts, as, without a common language, nations began to compete for resources and power, generating wars and disputes. Babel, therefore, represents not only the confusion of languages, but also the beginning of a divided humanity searching for identity. This linguistic division, initially a corrective measure, becomes a source of conflict in human history, as, without clear communication, people grew further apart, distancing from the unity they had initially experienced. Divine intervention in Babel is a lesson on the limits of human power and the importance of humility. God does not desire humanity to unite solely to seek its own power and glory, but rather to seek a unity founded on faith and love for one another. The story of Babel teaches us that any attempt at greatness without God is destined to fail. The pride that motivated the tower's construction is the same that, according to Scripture, leads to the fall of other characters throughout the Bible, such as Lucifer and kings like Nebuchadnezzar. Babel, therefore, serves as an eternal reminder that man cannot sustain himself without God, and that his true greatness lies in recognizing his dependence on the Creator. It is a warning that humans should not seek glory for themselves, but should live to glorify God and fulfill his purpose. Taking this moment, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel to catch more videos like this one, where we explore the mysteries of Scripture and its profound messages for our lives. Don't forget to leave a like and turn on notifications so you won't miss any content. After the people's dispersion at Babel, the city's story does not end. It continues, in a sense, in a new form, Babylon. Babylon, which rises in the same region where Babel was built, becomes one of the most powerful and corrupt empires of antiquity. The city is repeatedly mentioned in Scripture as a symbol of pride, idolatry, and oppression. Babylon inherits Babel's spirit, embodying the same desire for greatness and autonomy, but on an even greater scale. The Babylonian Empire becomes a center of power and influence, ruled by kings who defy God and persecute his people. In the book of Isaiah, we find the prophecy about Babylon's destruction, where he writes, "Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the pride and beauty of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them." This verse shows that, like Babylon too would be destroyed for its arrogance and disobedience. The Babylonian Empire achieved an unmatched splendor for its time, with majestic palaces, imposing temples, and wealth that fascinated the ancient world. However, this material glory was accompanied by religious practices that directly challenged divine authority. Babylon was a city filled with idolatry, where pagan gods were worshipped and morally questionable rituals, including human sacrifices, were performed. The city was ruled by famous kings like Nebuchadnezzar, who at one point was humbled by God due to his unbridled pride. In Daniel 4 verse 30, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesties?" This verse shows the pride of a king who believed he had achieved everything by his own strength, forgetting that all power comes from God. The book of Daniel also tells the famous story of the writing on the wall, where King Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's successor, is warned of God's judgment. During a banquet, Belshazzar uses sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem, profaning them in an act of disrespect to God. In response, a mysterious hand appears, writing on the wall, "Mean, tekel, and parsin." These words mean that Belshazzar's reign was weighed and found wanting, and that his empire would be divided and given to other peoples. This event marks the beginning of Babylon's fall, soon invaded and conquered by the Persians. This fall of Babylon is seen as a reflection of God's intervention in Babel. When pride and idolatry become intolerable, God intervenes to correct the course of human history. Like Babylon symbolizes the limits of divine patience with human arrogance. The story of Babylon continues to echo in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Revelation, where it is described as the great prostitute. In Revelation 18 verse 2, we find a prophecy about Babylon's destruction in the last days. Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit. Babylon is depicted as the ultimate symbol of corruption and decadence, a city that seduces humanity with its pleasures but leads to perdition. Many theologians believe that this Babylon represents a worldwide system that rejects God and exalts humanity. Just as Babel sought glory and unity without God, this prophetic Babylon also attempts to unite humanity around values that defy divine authority. This connection between Babel and Babylon is a warning about the dangers of a world that seeks to organize and prosper without God. For many, this apocalyptic Babylon represents not just a city, but an ideology that transcends the ages, a mindset that rejects God and promotes human glory above all. In our modern world, some see technological advances, centralized political power, and globalization as signs of a new Babylon, where humanity once again tries to unify without God. This unity, based on material interests and human ideologies, is seen by some as a repetition of Babel's error, seeking glory and power apart from God. Babylon then remains a symbol of warning, a city that achieved the peak of human glory but was destroyed for its corruption. It reminds us that without God, any human construction, no matter how grand, is destined for failure and ruin. In the New Testament, particularly in Revelation, Babylon emerges as a central figure in end-time prophecy, described as the great prostitute and as a symbol of human corruption and a system that rejects God. In Revelation 18 verse 2, we read, "With a mighty voice he shouted, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit.'" This Babylon represents, according to many scholars, a city or value system that exalts human power, pleasures, and materialism over worship and obedience to God. For some, this apocalyptic Babylon is the continuation of Babel's spirit, as it attempts to unify humanity around an ideal of greatness and glory that ignores the Creator. This figure, embodying sin and idolatry, appears in the last days as a challenge to divine authority, and prophecy warns us of the danger of a society that seeks only its power. The idea of Babylon in Revelation is closely connected to the figure of the Antichrist, who appears as a leader attempting to bring unity to the world, but with a purpose that defies God. In Revelation 13 verses 7 to 8, it is said, "It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life." This verse describes the Antichrist as a world leader, wielding power over all nations, a kind of unity that echoes Babel's attempt to centralize human power. This leader will be revered by many, offering false peace and deceptive prosperity. Just like Babel, where people sought to make a name for themselves, the Antichrist represents the culmination of this desire for self-sufficiency and power, but without God's presence. This reign will be marked by the worship of creation itself, rejecting true worship of the Creator. The Antichrist figure symbolizes the peak of Babel's spirit, as he tries to establish a global unity that exalts humanity and rejects divine principles. According to prophecy, he will emerge as a charismatic leader who will seduce the world with promises of peace and progress. However, this peace will be superficial, as it will be based on a system that directly challenges God's will. In 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4, Paul describes the Antichrist as one who opposes and exalts himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. This verse highlights the Antichrist's pretense of assuming God's place, an attitude echoing the pride and rebellion of Babel's builders. He will seek to control the world and unify all nations under a system that glorifies humanity but leads to spiritual ruin. The connection between Babel, Babylon, and the Antichrist is a reminder that human pride and the desire for glory without God lead to ruin. From the Tower of Babel, through the Babylonian Empire, and culminating in the Antichrist prophecy, we see a repetition of the same mistake, attempting to distance from God and build a civilization based on human power. Biblical history shows that whenever humans attempt to achieve greatness and self-sufficiency without the Creator, they are destined to fail. In Babel, God intervened to prevent humanity from continuing its self-sufficiency project. In Babylon, he judged and destroyed the city for its idolatry. And in the last days, the great Babylon and the Antichrist will face final judgment. This sequence of biblical events warns of the dangers of ignoring God's limits and trying to build a world without Him. This reflection leads us to think about the current state of the world and the influences that resemble the spirit of Babel and Babylon. We live in an era of technological advances and globalization, where nations are more interconnected than ever. Communication and unity among peoples are facilitated, but many wonder, on what basis is this unity being built? Are we repeating Babel's error, trying to achieve greatness and security by our own strength, but without God? The story of Babel, Babylon, and the Antichrist is a warning that humanity should not rely solely on its understanding, but seek true wisdom and humility in God. It's an invitation to reflect on the values we promote and to reevaluate our posture in a world increasingly focused on pride and self-sufficiency. The story of the Tower of Babel and its developments in Babylon and the Antichrist brings a profound message about the human condition and the dangers of pride. Since the beginning, the Bible shows us that the desire for greatness, when based solely on self-sufficiency and power, leads to distancing from God and inevitably to destruction. Babel is a reminder that humanity, when united with a purpose that rejects divine guidance, is destined to fragment and face the consequences of its ambition. This story challenges us to reflect on our desires and the way we seek personal and collective fulfillment. Are we also building towers of Babel in our lives, trying to achieve success and security on our own, without God's guidance? In our modern world, where globalization and technology bring people closer and create a sense of unity, the story of Babel gains new relevance. We live in a time where the quest for status, recognition, and independence seem to have become the most important values. However, the biblical account warns us of the dangers of a unity based on pride and self-sufficiency. This fragile unity, based solely on human power, is easily shaken and, like in Babel, can result in confusion and division. The Bible teaches us that true unity is only possible when centered on God and founded on values that promote love, respect, and humility. The connection with Babylon and the Antichrist reinforces this point, showing that throughout history, pride and idolatry have always led to downfall. Babylon was a glorious empire, but it ignored God and paid a high price for its arrogance. Likewise, the Antichrist represents the culmination of a world trying to live without God, promoting peace and prosperity that are illusory and temporary. This sequence of biblical events reveals that when humanity distances itself from divine values and seeks glory for itself, it is building something inevitably destined for destruction. This warning is especially relevant for today, where we are constantly tempted to rely on our own strength and pursue greatness without the Creator's guidance. This story invites us to reflect on the true source of our security and purpose. Just as in Babel, where God confused the languages to remind humanity of its limits, today He also invites us to recognize that our true purpose and peace come from Him. The account of the Tower of Babel and its developments in Babylon and the Antichrist prophecy teach us that humility and dependence on God are essential for a full and meaningful life. Greatness built without God is temporary and illusory. That's why we are called to build our lives on a solid foundation rooted in faith and obedience to God, rather than on our ambitions and desires. Thank you for watching this in-depth analysis of the Tower of Babel, Babylon, and the Antichrist. If this message resonated with you, share it with others who may benefit from this biblical story and its life lessons. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell icon so you don't miss our next videos, where we will continue to explore Bible stories and their profound meanings for our time. Leave your comments below with your thoughts and reflections. We want to hear what you think about this story. See you in the next video.